The One That Got Away is a really good episode of The Golden Girls. This is the third episode of the fourth season. It's directed by Terry Hughes, and as always, there will be spoilers from now and share some thoughts. And it starts off with Rose and Dorothy outside, and Sophia's there to begin with. She goes inside, and they see this flash of light in the sky, and Rose instantly thinks it must be a UFO. So Dorothy goes inside to pick a bag for Rose to go in the spaceship, and Blanche is there. And she's heard from somebody from her past, somebody called Ham. And back in the day, Ham had turned her down. I like the fact that Ham had turned her down because it means the fact that she had propositioned him. And I feel like at the time, for a woman to proposition a man, definitely wouldn't have been that common. So I kind of like that. And I realizes that this is her chance to rectify that, because he's the only person who's ever turned her down. He was the one who got away. And we'll come back to that in a moment. First of all, we find out that Rose contacted the military. Blanche is then getting ready to go out on her date. I love her dress. I absolutely love the outfit. And then there's a knock at the door, and Ham has arrived. He's played by John Harkins. And he's not necessarily conventionally attractive. He's a little bit larger than he used to be. He doesn't have as much hair as he used to. But Blanche is still happy to go out with him. I feel like she sees this more of a project than anything else. Sophia has a couple of remarks about Ham's appearance, and just as he's leaving, Rose says, "I hope we get to see more of you." And Dorothy just puts her hand over Sophia's mouth and says, "Don't even bother." Somebody from the military then arrives because Rose had contacted them, and they confirmed it was a UFO. And I was curious because I didn't know why they'd say that, and we do come back to that towards the end. With regards to Ham and Blanche, I predicted this would go one of two ways. And I was wrong completely, but I will tell you what I thought nevertheless. I thought either Blanche would follow this through and sleep with him, and now there would be no man who had ever rejected her, or she'd get to the point where he's desperate to go to bed with her, and she'll say to him, "Maybe some other time," which is what he had said to her. I feel like that would have been funny, but that's not what they went with. But where it went was still pretty interesting. They get back to the house, and again, Blanche propositions him, and he says, "Maybe some other time, Blanche," and he leaves. And then I thought, maybe he's gay. Maybe that's where they're going. And again, I was wrong. It isn't. Later on, Rose and Dorothy are in the kitchen. Dorothy now believes it was a UFO because, well, the military said so. So what else could it be? But they're not allowed to say anything, so they have to keep quiet. Blanche then comes into the kitchen and is determined to not give up. She's going to try again. We cut immediately to the restaurant. Really nice scene, really nice location. And she tries to seduce Ham. And yet again, he says the same thing. And Blanche storms out. And because she'd said some rather seductive things to him, all of the men in the restaurant stand up and follow her out, which was a very funny scene. It was very, very well done. And he goes to the house, he follows after her, and he explains why he said this to her. And I will say it's a little bit of a far-fetched explanation. I enjoyed it because I didn't expect it, but I also find it hard to believe. The reason he kept saying this is because the one time, in his story, the one time he and Blanche had slept together, he hadn't enjoyed it. And he described what Blanche was wearing that night, and Blanche realised that it had been her sister, not her, that he'd slept with. But I do kind of find it hard to believe that he couldn't even remember who he'd slept with. One could argue after many years maybe he'd forget, but bearing in mind he rejected her, how much time would have passed? So I don't really believe it, I don't really buy it. But at the same time, I wasn't expecting it, so I kind of enjoyed it nevertheless. And Blanche is happy because he's just said his sister, or her sister rather, is not good in bed, which Blanche is taking great delight in. We then find out Sophia is reading the paper and there's an article in there, and it turns out the UFO was actually a secret bomber, and that's why the military lied about it. So that made sense. That part of the story I could believe. And we have this lovely scene at the end where Dorothy and Rose are outside. Dorothy's sitting with Rose because she doesn't necessarily want to dampen Rose's spirits completely. And Dorothy falls asleep while Rose is talking. And there's a flash of light in the sky. And Rose goes to talk with Dorothy, but obviously Dorothy's asleep. And Rose just has a little smile to herself as she believes that time, that was the UFO. And it was a really lovely way to end it. It's a really lovely episode from start to finish. Not predictable. As I said, I don't completely buy Ham's story. I find it hard to believe you wouldn't know which sister you slept with, but maybe he was very drunk. I don't know, but it's not too much of a problem. Personal highlights would have to be Dorothy putting her hand over Sophia's mouth, and Dorothy finally starting to believe that it's a UFO, or at least not knowing what else to believe. And the scene in the restaurant where Blanche tried to seduce Ham and everybody followed her out. I guess Blanche's happiness at finding out about her sister, and then Rose at the end there. So in all, the one that got away is a really solid episode of The Golden Girls. Definitely an episode that I really thoroughly enjoyed.